They a throuple. Why is he there with them in an intimate dinner? It's very strange. It seems like there's three of them in this relationship.
It's like the most uncomfortable throuple we've ever seen, I would argue, and it is pushing Harry over the edge.
Why is he there with them in an intimate dinner, seemingly, when they could be there as a couple? Shouldn't they be there as a couple? It's really weird. And then Marcus was out walking with Meghan in the street. There was a paparazzi video that I imagine in high school she very much fit the mean girl mode. I'm sure maybe Marcus fits that as well. Harry doesn't really fit that in the same way. And so I'm sure they're two peas in a pod. And Harry's on the outside a lot. And so Harry does what he
Princess Diana once told Martin Bashir that there were three people in her marriage, so it was a little bit crowded. It was one of the most famous lines she ever delivered, and it became one of the defining quotes of the 20th century's most scrutinized royal collapse. The irony that this same observation now applies, in a strikingly literal way, to her own son's marriage is not lost on the people who have been watching the Sussex relationship closely, because the dynamics playing out in Australia over the past week have raised questions that are no longer whispered in private circles. They are being discussed openly, on camera, and with a specificity that the Sussex communications operation appears entirely unprepared to address.
From Coogee, it marks the end of a whirlwind tour. 4 days and just two cities. The main event here at the Intercontinental in Coogee.
BFF. You could see him chewing. Totally obvious. In Australia, when
the central figure in this conversation is Markus Anderson. For those who have been following the Sussex story, his name is not new. He is the global membership director of Soho House, a man who rose from waiter to the right hand of founder Nick Jones, and whose presence in Meghan's life predates Harry by years. He was at the royal wedding. He was at the New York baby shower. His fingerprints appear at significant moments throughout the timeline of how Meghan Markle ascended from Toronto actress to global brand. But what happened in Australia this past week moved the conversation about Markus Anderson from background footnote to foreground story in a way that is impossible to ignore. Consider what was documented in plain sight during this tour. Markus Anderson was present on Meghan's morning beach walk in Sydney. He was present at the Her Best Life retreat dinner. He was seated near Meghan at the rugby match in a configuration that generated immediate and widespread commentary. The camera framing at the retreat dinner placed Markus and Harry on opposite sides of Meghan, their bodies effectively bracketing her in a visual arrangement that observers described as striking, to put it diplomatically. And then there was the video Meghan posted to her own Instagram account.
Dollars to the Australian government for taxes and these sorts of things. And so the lead up to this whole thing was a disaster, and it was a disaster on the day too. And it's so weird again that Meghan Markle.
An intimate dinner setting where Harry was visible in the background, chewing, looking neither relaxed nor happy, while the energy of the room orbited around someone else. It was not the image a loving spouse typically chooses to share with millions of followers. And people noticed. The discomfort Harry displayed at the rugby match became a story in itself. When Harry arrived and found Markus already established in Meghan's immediate social orbit, the footage that followed showed something that commentators described with words like jealous, emasculated, and visibly unsettled. There was a moment involving Harry and another man, a reaching, touching gesture directed at the man's clothing, that was widely characterized as an attempt to reassert presence, to reclaim attention in a space where he clearly did not feel like the center. It was uncomfortable to watch. It was more uncomfortable to consider what it suggested about the private reality of this marriage, when the cameras are not arranged specifically to flatter it. The pattern being described by observers who have been tracking this dynamic is not simply about one trip or one set of photographs. It is about a recurring configuration that has appeared in multiple contexts across multiple occasions. Markus travels with Harry and Meghan in situations where his presence is not professionally explicable. He occupies physical space in their social interactions that a business associate would not typically occupy, and Meghan's visible comfort with Markus consistently exceeds, at least in the available footage, her visible comfort with her own husband. The dynamic has led commentators to reach for a word that is admittedly unusual in the context of royal commentary, but that an increasing number of people are finding themselves using. The word is throuple, and while the usage is partly provocative, it points at something real, which is that the Sussex marriage, as it presents itself publicly, appears to involve three people in a way that is creating visible and documented tension. There is also a broader question that this dynamic raises about the Sussex marriage itself. one that the available evidence invites, but does not conclusively answer. Marriages under the kind of sustained public pressure and commercial stress that Harry and Meghan are currently experiencing do not typically become more stable over time. They become more brittle. The financial failures accumulate. The public humiliations accumulate. The gap between the image being projected and the reality being lived widens until maintaining the performance requires more energy than the relationship can generate. The footage from Australia, the visible tension at the rugby, the Instagram post that framed Harry as an afterthought in his own marriage, the retreat where he sat on stage looking like a man calculating how quickly he could leave, does not show a couple in a comfortable private partnership who happen to be navigating a difficult professional period. It shows something more complicated and less comfortable than that. The question of what is actually driving this arrangement is one that several experienced royal observers have begun to address directly. One analysis suggests that Markus may serve a functional role in keeping the Sussex operation running, that his Soho House connections and his global network provide logistical and commercial infrastructure that Harry alone cannot provide. Another analysis focuses on the psychological dynamic, the suggestion that Meghan's natural social home is among people who share her particular brand of status-conscious ambition, and that Harry, who was born into the thing she has spent her life pursuing, does not quite fit that social register in the same way Markus does. Whatever the precise mechanics, the effect on Harry is visible and it is not subtle. He is, by every observable measure, on the outside of something that is happening in his own marriage, and that outsider position appears to be worsening with each public appearance. Now let us turn to the Her Best Life retreat itself, because what happened there deserves to be examined in full, and the full picture is considerably more damaging than the glossy promotional footage released by the Sussex team would suggest. The retreat was held at the Intercontinental Hotel at Coogee Beach, a venue whose ballroom was not yet finished at the time of the event. Tickets were priced at thousands of dollars per person. The attendance figures tell the story most efficiently. The Sussex team briefed in advance that Her Best Life was a sold-out success. It was not. The number of women who actually attended was described by observers as less than 300, a figure that corresponds to a fraction of the venue's capacity and a fraction of what would be required to cover the costs associated with the kind of high-profile international tour the Sussexes had mounted. The ballroom was not full. The seats were not all occupied, and the gap between what was publicly claimed and what was visibly true was wide enough to be noticed not just by critics, but by anyone watching the available footage with clear eyes. The staging itself made the emptiness visible in ways that no amount of creative camera work could fully conceal. The chairs were sparse. The room echoed where it should have buzzed, and Harry and Markus Anderson were placed on either side of Meghan on what observers described as one of the cheapest-looking stages visible in a major hotel ballroom in recent memory, a piece of set dressing that underscored the gap between the aspirational presentation of the Sussex brand and its current commercial reality. And then there was the duration. Initial reporting suggested Meghan spent approximately 2 hours at her own retreat before leaving to join Harry at a rugby match. That figure was later corrected. The actual time she spent at the event was approximately half an hour, 30 minutes, at an event her fans had paid thousands of dollars to attend, at a retreat bearing her name, built around her identity, presented to the women who bought tickets as an intimate experience with Meghan Markle. She arrived, she stayed for 30 minutes, and she left. The women who had organized their lives and their finances around this occasion received 30 minutes of the person they had come to see, and then watched her exit the building to go to a sporting event. The content of those 30 minutes was, by the accounts of observers who examined the available footage, not substantively different from the kind of affirmation-heavy, emotionally generic content that fills 1,000 wellness podcasts and retreat programs every week. There were words about seeing each other, about holding space, about surviving together. There were tears that drew immediate and wide commentary about their apparent spontaneity. There was Markus Anderson seated at the dinner table, visible in the framing alongside Harry, in an arrangement that several observers described as more appropriate to a domestic partnership than a professional advisory relationship. And then she was gone. Half an hour, thousands of dollars, a ballroom that was not full, in a hotel whose ballroom was not finished, at an event that was supposed to fund an entire international tour and did not come close to doing so. The brand implications of all of this extend beyond the retreat itself. Meghan's fashion merchandising operation, which has been one of the consistent through lines of the Australian tour, took a significant reputational hit this week that is worth examining carefully. The decision to list for sale the outfits worn during appearances at the Melbourne Royal Children's Hospital and, more seriously, at the Bondi Beach Memorial site, generated a level of backlash that crossed political and media boundaries. The Bondi Beach attack was an anti-Semitic terrorist act. Families were shattered. A community was traumatized. Meghan Markle visited the memorial, and within a short window of time, the outfit she wore during that visit was listed on her fashion platform. The response was not ambiguous. It was described by commentators across the spectrum as exploitative, disgraceful, and disqualifying. The platform being used for this merchandising is a website called One Off, and the details of that website are themselves revealing. When it launched, it carried the names of genuinely significant fashion figures, including Kendall Jenner, Bella Hadid, and Hailey Bieber, among approximately 100 creators who were part of the initial beta launch. By the time of the Australian tour, that number had dropped to fewer than 30. The people who build genuine fashion credibility over years of actual work in that industry had looked at the platform, assessed its prospects, and quietly departed. What remained was a website that independent analysts described as slow, clunky, over-stylized to the point of navigation failure, and not meaningfully distinguishable from existing platforms that had been doing the same thing for years without the celebrity veneer. The assessment that it will not succeed long-term is based not on hostility, but on the observable pattern of every commercial venture Meghan has attempted since leaving royal life. The trajectory is consistent. Launch with maximum publicity. Generate initial coverage. Watch the underlying product fail to connect with a sustainable audience. Quietly move on to the next thing. This pattern matters because it illuminates the deeper dysfunction in the Sussex commercial strategy. The Australia tour was not primarily a humanitarian mission. It was not primarily a royal-adjacent goodwill exercise. It was a commercial operation designed to generate revenue through a combination of merchandise sales, event ticket income, and media exposure that could be leveraged into future deals. The charity visits and the wellness retreat and the rugby appearance were all components of that commercial operation. They were there to generate the photographs, the footage, and the cultural presence that would justify the price tags on the merchandise and the tickets. That is the model. And it is a model that the late Queen Elizabeth II explicitly warned against, with clarity and with wisdom, when she told Harry and Meghan that combining a life of service with a life of commercial profit was not a sustainable or appropriate path. She was right. She was right in 2020 when she said it, and she is more visibly right now than she was then, because the intervening years have produced exactly the outcome she predicted. The argument that what Harry and Meghan are doing is simply what celebrities do, that they are promoting their brand and monetizing their platform the way any public figure with a following would, misses something fundamental about what royal association actually is and why it carries the weight it does. A celebrity who visits a hospital is doing so as a private individual, a famous one, whose presence generates goodwill and media coverage, but whose fundamental status is that of a private person making a personal choice. A royal who visits a hospital is doing something categorically different. They are bringing the symbolic weight of an institution that represents continuity, duty, and the relationship between the state and its people. That weight is not earned by the individual. It is borrowed from the institution, and the institution lends it on the understanding that it will be used in service of the public, not in service of a merchandise platform. The moment it is used otherwise, the terms of the arrangement are violated, and when those terms are violated openly, repeatedly, and without apparent awareness that anything problematic is occurring, the institution has no choice but to respond. The only question is when and how decisively. What genuine royal service requires, and what makes it valuable not just to the institution, but to the public it serves, is the absence of a financial motive. When a working royal visits a children's hospital, the children in that hospital and their families know that the visit is not about selling anything. The attention, the time, the symbolic weight of the occasion, it all flows toward the people being visited. When that same visit is followed within hours by a merchandise listing for the outfit worn during it, the meaning of the visit is retroactively transformed. It is no longer a gift of presence. It is a content production exercise. The sick children become props in a commercial shoot, and the trust that makes royal engagement meaningful, the trust that has been built over generations by people who gave their time without a merchandise platform attached, is damaged. Not just for Harry and Meghan, for the institution itself. This is why the voices calling on King Charles to act are growing louder and more insistent. The reporting from palace-adjacent sources this week confirmed that there are no active conversations about stripping Harry and Meghan of their titles or removing Harry from the line of succession. The institutional reasoning is familiar. Any move against the Sussexes will be weaponized as evidence of persecution, will generate another book or documentary, will give them a fresh round of victimhood to sell. The palace prefers to absorb the damage quietly rather than provoke a louder confrontation. That reasoning is understandable. It is also, by the assessment of an increasing number of serious observers, dangerously wrong, because the damage is not static. It is not a fixed cost that can be managed through patience and strategic silence. It is compounding. Every tour like this one, every merchandise listing tied to a memorial site, every sold-out event that turns out not to have been sold out, every 30-minute retreat appearance, adds to a body of evidence that the Sussex operation is willing to exploit the symbolic power of royal association without limit. And without limit means it will continue to escalate, because the underlying commercial pressure on the Sussex brand is not decreasing. It is increasing. With Love Meghan cancelled, the Spotify deal gone, the Netflix relationship under reported strain, the lifestyle brand failing to gain meaningful traction, the fashion platform hemorrhaging credible participants. Each failure increases the pressure to find new revenue, and the most reliable revenue source available to Harry and Meghan remains the one thing they did not earn and cannot be stripped of without a decision from the palace: the title, the association, the royal adjacency that opens doors no amount of celebrity status alone would open. A friend of Prince William and Catherine described the situation with precision that deserves to be quoted closely. In their assessment, young cancer patients can end up looking like props to help the Sussexes generate commercial revenue. They called it extremely dangerous for the monarchy. The public needs to be able to trust that royals undertaking engagements with vulnerable populations are doing so out of genuine duty, not to provide window dressing for a commercially driven tour. The moment that trust is broken, the entire relationship between the institution and the people it serves is damaged in ways that take generations to repair. And that trust, once it becomes visible to ordinary people that a duchess is listing for sale the outfit she wore to a massacre memorial, does not return simply because the listing is quietly removed after the backlash becomes too loud to ignore. The damage is done in the moment. The correction comes too late. And the people who were at that memorial, who were grieving, who allowed a public figure into their space in the belief that her presence was an act of solidarity rather than a content production exercise, those people deserved better. They deserved honesty. They deserved to be treated as the point of the visit rather than as the backdrop for it. That is the standard that genuine royal service sets. And it is the standard that this tour, in every observable dimension, failed to meet. Prince William sees all of this. He sees it with the clarity of a man who has spent his entire adult life watching his family navigate the intersection of public service and private dysfunction, who has watched his brother choose chaos repeatedly and then narrate that chaos as victimhood for profit. He sees the Australia tour for what it was. He sees the merchandise listings and the 30-minute retreat and the Marcus Anderson configuration and the performative emotion at the memorial site. He sees his grandmother's warning being ignored in real time, on an international stage, for the world to watch. And the conclusion he has reached, by every available account from people who know him, is not one of patience or strategic tolerance. It is one of finality. His brother has made his choices. Those choices have consequences. And when William is king, those consequences will be enforced with the full authority of the throne, not through dramatic public announcements, not through the kind of confrontational gestures that would hand Harry another victimhood narrative to sell, but through the quiet, absolute, and irreversible exercise of institutional power that a king possesses and that no amount of Netflix deals or wellness retreats or merchandise platforms can override. The door is closing. It has been closing for years. And the Australian tour, with all its staged photographs and empty ballrooms and 30-minute appearances and memorial site merchandise, has brought it several inches closer to shut. The Sussex brand is not simply failing commercially. It is failing morally, in the specific sense that its operations have become increasingly difficult to distinguish from exploitation. Exploitation of tragedy. Exploitation of vulnerable people. Exploitation of an institution whose symbolic power was built over centuries by people who served without a merchandise platform attached to their service. That exploitation has a ceiling, and the ceiling is the patience of the public, the patience of the press, and eventually the patience of the institution that holds the titles being exploited. All three are wearing thin. What comes next in this story will be determined by which runs out first. But the direction of travel is not in question. The commercial failures are multiplying. The public tolerance is eroding. The institutional patience has limits that are being tested with greater frequency and greater boldness. And the man who will one day have the authority to draw a definitive line under all of it is watching. He has been watching for years. He sees exactly what is happening. And when his moment comes, those who know him believe he will act with the kind of finality that the situation has long demanded and the institution has so far been unwilling to provide. That moment is not as distant as it once seemed. And when it arrives, the 30-minute retreat and the memorial merchandise and the Marcus Anderson configuration will all be part of the record that explains why it came.